I did. This is an interview with Lyn Jones on May the 4th, 2021, and this is being recorded in my studio at Quarrumup. Lyn, can I ask you, first of all, when you were born and where?
I was born on the 12th of March 1944, King Edward Memorial Hospital.
Your parents, were they in Perth at that time?
My dad was in New Guinea and my mum was living in Lesmurdie and then came down to King Edward to have me.
So your father was very much caught up in World War II?
Yeah, he was in the 2nd 7th Field Ambulance under Colonel Swift.
Did he ever talk about that?
Oh yeah, I used to hear about it quite a bit because he was on Crete first and then I'd say he came home in about 1942 and that's when he met and married Mum because they got married in May 1943 and then after that he went to New Guinea.
So he was in two of the most challenging situations, weren't they? Because Crete got invaded by the Germans with the paratroops. Yes. How did he fare in that? Did he escape?
Yes. There was a couple from, there's a Dr. Alan King that was in his unit. He actually got captured. He was taken to Germany and that's where he learned about tuberculosis because when we used to have the chest x-rays, that was him that brought them in, the compulsory ones, because that's what he did when he was in Germany. And then when he came back here, Alan King actually became the head of Social Security in Canberra and then eventually came back over to Western Australia and he was head of Social Security in Western Australia.
Where did your family live after the war?
Well, Dad actually got out because the war never finished. I think it was September 45, but he actually got out in July 44 because Mum nearly died having me. And so he got out on compassionate grounds and we moved down here and he worked at East Witchcliffe Mill for 3 years. And then in 1947 they built the blacksmith shop in Station Road, which is now the yoga school. And we shifted into town and lived in the house behind the blacksmith shop. The blacksmith shop, when Dad sold it, it became a panawaitas. And then people bought it and they really didn't do anything. A chap used to store wool in it and then Carmel Czar actually bought it and made it into the yoga school.
Was that a good business, blacksmiths at that time?
Yeah, early on it was, yes. But it was a bit of a, how would you put it, you never got paid a lot of money. Out of 8 customers perhaps, if you got 3 that actually paid money, you were doing well. Most of the others gave you like fruit and veggies and all that sort of stuff, so it was sort of pretty much a barter system.
This would be a comment, wouldn't it, on the fact that there weren't presumably too many tractors around. People were still using horses.
Yeah. Well, we used to have there was a chap, Freddie Isaacs, and he was Sam Isaacs' grandson and the other Sam Isaacs' son. He used to work for the Shire and we used to have the old pan toilets then, so of course he did that. And you could still get money for your beer bottles and things. He did that, dug graves and dog catcher. That was his 4 jobs. And he used to use a horse and cart and he had a Clydesdale. Didn't like being shod. And he used to bring it to Dad and Dad used to have to put it in a crush so that he could shoe it because it'd kick him if he didn't.
They're big, powerful horses, aren't they? Magnificent creatures.
But he used to, do quite a few. Because I've actually got a photo of Dad going down Station Road on a horse bareback. And I said to him one day, I said, what are you doing that? He said, somebody's got to make sure the shoes are on properly. It was just an excuse for him to ride the horse. But that was him.
Because Clydesdales generally don't get ridden, do they? They're pulling things. What about your mother's background?
Mum's family, they came over from England as such and went to Victoria and then ended up in Kalgoorlie, the gold mines. And then eventually they all shifted to Perth, of course, both sides of the family, because that's where her mum and dad actually met, was in the goldfields. And my great-granddad, he used to own half of St George's Terrace and half of Stirling Street. And he was a mason and he used to do all those curly bits on the old buildings. That was his job. But he used to go off every now and again because he liked going looking for gold. And the painting by Tom McCubbin, Down on His Luck, that's my granddad, my great-granddad. He just boiled his billy and went to make his tea or whatever it was and it spilled.
You should get a free copy of that painting.
Yeah, you should do, yeah. Yeah, so that's that sort of that side of the family. Whereas Dad's came out from England in They actually landed Christmas Day 1910. Dad used to always sit at the table and say such and such a year, since we came. He died in February 84, so I thought Christmas 84, I'll do it. And I started to do it, and my kids turned around and told me, not your job, it's Dad's, Granddad's. They let me do it in 2010 because it was 100 years. But up until then, they wouldn't let me do it.
What are your first memories of Margaret River?
I have some funny memories of Margaret River. I mean, I can remember as a kid coming in to come into my grandparents, because where the yoga school is, my grandparents lived next door, coming in to have Christmas, to have roast, lunch on Sunday sort of thing. And my grandmother taking me out. You want to come and help me feed the chooks and the chickens? Yes. You want to water the chickens? I said yes, and I watered them. I didn't put it in the dish like I was supposed to. I watered them. And she never said boo. All she did was pick them all up, put them in a cardboard box, put the oven door down and put them on the thing to dry them. Well, I watered the chickens like she told me. That's one thing I can remember. And another one, when we lived at East Witchcliffe, we used to walk into the shops in Witchcliffe because there was 2 grocers' shops there, and on the corner was opposite where the fuel station is now, there was a sort of like post office and that type of thing in there. And we used to walk in, and I can always remember Mum's sister saying to me, because they'd bring the pram, of course, because I was only probably about 2, would you like to get in the pram, love? No, I am quite capable of walking on my own, thank you. And so I'd walk on my own. That's sort of a few of the first things I remember. Then the other thing sort of like, because when I was little, when I first moved into town, the factory in Station Road was actually a butter factory. I can still remember all the trucks and all the cream cans and all that sort of stuff, because it was sort of busy all the time, it was all go. Because then in 1955 it became the cheese factory. And that's when my dad actually closed the blacksmith shop and went and worked over at the factory, because he was actually a boiler maker as well by trade, so he used to stoke the boilers and whatnot at the factory.
I guess that emergence of milk and cream being made was the long-term result of the group settlers.
Oh, yes. Yeah, well, here it was up until probably late 50s, early 60s, there was no sheep or beef cattle here. It was all dairy cattle. They probably literally had dairy cattle, horses and pigs. That was about it, because when they used to take the whey off the milk, a chap used to come in and get the whey for his pigs and come and get that. I can remember that too, because they had a tank at the back of the factory, and he used to come and get the whey every day for his pigs.
We think of Margaret River as a green place with cool temperatures. What are your childhood memories of the weather? Was it like it is now or different?
It was wet, because actually I found a cutting in the paper that I'd say my grandmother had sent to my uncle, because he was my dad's youngest brother. He was living in Kalgoorlie at the time, and it was 1952, and we'd had 70 inches that year, and that was a lot even for us. Most years we get between 50 and 55 inches. And I can remember as a kid, you'd probably get 1 month of the year that it never rained, and it was usually one of the summer months. And say, for example, it was, say, January that it didn't rain. February and December, you didn't get a lot of rain. It was more the fine sort of rain, but you still got rain. And as I say, 50 to 55 inches. And I can remember going to square dancing one time and talking to a chap called Max Penfold, and I said something about I'd found this thing. He said, yeah, now, 30 is the average, 40 is a bloody good year, was his words, and he was much the same as me. He'd lived here pretty well all his life, so he knew the difference between the seasons and all that sort of stuff. And we didn't get the heat like we do now, I can remember as a kid sort of in the old temperatures as such, between 80 and 90, that was a stinking hot day down here, whereas now we get up in the 38s and 39s and all that sort of stuff, so it's a lot hotter than what it was, then.
When you walk around the countryside around here, you see a lot of creeks that are dry in the summer. Was that true of the time you were growing up?
No. Most of them, even if they didn't run, they still had water in them pretty much. I mean, even like down near the old station, they had 2 gravel pits. And even those, even though there wasn't a lot of water in them, there was still probably a couple of inches all the time, pretty much, because we used to go down there and catch tadpoles when we were kids, and gilgies and all that sort of stuff in the gravel pits.
That's an interesting comment on climate change, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
What about schooling? Where did you go to school?
I went to school I actually did kindergarten first, at the one now that's a childcare centre opposite the primary school, because that was built in 1948, I think, and so I went there in 1949, and then I went to school, of course, at the primary school where it is now, not that the building is the same, of course, but there from 1950 till 1955. Yeah, when the high school opened in 1955, grades 6 and 7 actually had to go to the high school because they got more kids, because they closed Rosa Brook and all those. They'd got more kids than they expected. There wasn't enough room in the primary school for the 7 grades, although it was, when I went to school, grade 1 was infants, and then you had standard 1, 2 to 6 as such. And so, like in today's terms, grades 6 and 7, we were actually in the high school for our grades. So we actually did 5 years in the high school.
And so you moved on naturally into the other building. Any favourite subjects or good teachers? Do you recall anything?
Yeah, we had a few. Actually, one of the teachers we had when I was in primary school, I had him twice, I think. I had him sort of earlier on, about grade 3 or something, and then I had him again in grade 6 and 7. It was Charlie Stapleton. And he was a singer and a half. He had a voice like you wouldn't believe, and he always did the choir and all that sort of stuff. I can always remember him once. We were in about grade 6 or something, and he said, "You want me to see me stand on my hands?" Yeah. And so he shifted all the desks back and all this sort of stuff, and all he did was got his hands and put them under his feet. Didn't do the handstand bit or anything. So, of course, we just sat there and looked at him. We didn't do anything much. He was good. And then we had a teacher in high school. She taught art and phys ed and all that sort of stuff. Ellen Schooler, and she ended up actually marrying Charlie Stapleton. But her father was the headmaster at Forest Grove School, which is now the Margaret River Independent School, I think they call it. And then the other one I had was Peter Brennan, and he belonged to the Brennan family that were down there, and he taught us English, history and geography. And I actually ran into him at the doctor's surgery one day, and he goes to the same doctor as me, and anyhow, I just come out and he was going in, and I ran back to Dr. Clark and I said, "He was my history, geography and English teacher when I was at school." And Peter says, "Yeah, and I suppose you failed them all." I said, "No, I didn't," because we had another one, Mr. Thompson. He was a good teacher, but he was very, very easily sidetracked. And when we got to year 10, he actually left and we got a Mr. Barrett. And because we'd sort of sidetracked Mr. Thompson that much, we were a bit behind in a few of our subjects. And he used to teach Maths A, Maths B and General Science. And Mr. Barrett sort of told the headmaster, he said, "I can't get them up to scratch with the 3, I just can't do it, And Mr. Stewart was our headmaster at the time, and he said, "Oh, okay," he said, "I'll do General Science and you do the maths." And he came in with just, probably about 2 weeks before we sat for our junior certificate, and he said, you will pass, the rest haven't got a hope in hell." Okay. Anyhow, it was 27 of us sat for it, and 27 of us got it. So my dad actually went and congratulated him, and Dad reckons he wouldn't have been able to wear a hat, his head was that swollen because everybody passed.
Can you describe sidetracking? How did you divert him?
Oh, just sort of talk about what was going on around the place and things like that. It didn't take much at all to sidetrack him. He was so easy to just get off the subject, just by perhaps talking about what had happened the night before or something like that. He didn't take much at all to...
And was he interesting in the sidetrack?
Yeah, he was, yeah. He was a nice guy, he really was, but he was just so easy to get off track. And I don't say we didn't learn from him, but we probably didn't do as much as we could have, I suppose. That's the thing. It's, we just didn't.
You probably learned other things.
Yeah, we would have learned a lot from him probably.
How long did you stay in high school?
Well, down here at the time, it was only up to year 10. And I actually wanted to be a nurse. That was my aim in life. And in those days, if you got your junior certificate, it was enough for you to be able to get into nursing, but you still had to wait till you were 17 and a half. And of course, I was only 16 when I left school, so I would have had to wait for a year and a half. And I went up to Perth to look after an aunt of my mum's. That was actually, there was an aunt and uncle, but there was only 3 years difference between the uncle and mum's sister, and 5 between her and her uncle, so they were more like cousins than aunt and uncle. But anyhow, she'd had a melanoma taken off her tummy, and I went up to help look after her. And Dad must have come up for something, and Auntie Ede used to go to this hairdresser's because they lived in Mount Lawley, and the hairdressers were sort of the other side of the railway lines to where they were, and she must have said something to Dad about she was looking for an apprentice. And Dad says, "You want to do that?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I'll have a go." He said, "If you don't like it, after, when you're 17 and a half, you can do your nursing." I liked it, so I did it. And of course, in those days, it was 5 years apprenticeship. So I did the 5 years and became a hairdresser instead.
Did you go on doing that?
Yeah, well, because 1965, I turned 21 in the March. I finished my apprenticeship in the April, and I got married in the May. And then we shifted down here to Margaret River. And I actually started up a hairdresser's in what's Lloyd's now in the main street. It was Smiler Gales, actually, and the front part of it was sort of like sporting goods and ice creams and things like that. And then as you walk into it, on the right-hand side was the barbers, and on the left-hand side was me, hairdressers. And so I did that for 3 years. But then it was still much the same. If you had kids and they wanted to go on, you had to go, they'd have had to go away, so we decided to go back to Perth. And so we went up to Perth and we lived up there for about 23 years. But my husband always wanted to come back here. So in 1990, I moved back down here and lived in Station Road because I had my grandparents' old house. And then we sold that and then moved out to where we are now. And I'm sort of back on my dad's farm, actually.
Can I backtrack? Ask you how you met your husband?
I used to go to what they call the Anglican Youth Fellowship. And I joined a Anglican Youth Fellowship in Mount Lawley. St Patrick's, actually, in Mount Lawley. And he'd come to we used to have a dance every Friday night, and he came to the dance with his brother because his brother had a girlfriend. And I got introduced. He said, "I'm going to dance with you." And I actually went and hid in the toilets because anyhow, I come back out, of course. And that was 22nd of September 1961. And I never sort of had any more. He was it sort of business. And we got married in 65.
Square dancing was one of your enjoyable activities, wasn't it?
Yeah, ballroom dancing was too when we were younger, but because in those days it was all the balls and all that sort of stuff, so we used to go to that. But when we moved back down to Margaret River, a couple of friends of ours was asked, "Would you like to do square dancing?" "Oh yeah, we'll have a go." So in 1991 we joined that, and we did that until about 2016, I think it was, or something like that. Yeah, thoroughly enjoyed that. And because Quarramup actually, for a while, they had a thing where if there was a 5th Sunday in the month, they'd have a ballroom dancing thing. And they got this couple to help people that didn't know a lot of ballroom dancing and had a few lessons. But my husband, by that time, he'd got to the stage he couldn't do it because he used to get giddy waltzing. And so we used to go to them and we'd sit on the door and do the tickets and the raffle and all that sort of stuff, and then stay till supper, and then after that we'd go home and leave them to it so that they could dance. They didn't have to worry about the front door. And it's quite funny actually because the first one we did, there was a chap came in, they all paid and whatnot, and I think we were folding the raffle tickets, doing all that, and this chap comes back and he said, "You're Tom Doyle's daughter, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Your father used to do that, and Dad used to," because my mum couldn't dance, she used to get giddy. And so he'd go to the dances and he'd sit on the door, and then when he'd finished that, he'd go and dance, or else go and play the drums, one of the two, because he used to play the drums for a lot of the dances and things like that. When I was doing Meals on Wheels, and I went to this lady's place, and she said, "Are you from here?" And I said, "Yes." And I don't usually say, like to older people from around here, that I'm Lyn Jones, because they wouldn't know me as Lyn Jones. And I say, "I'm Tom Doyle's daughter." And most of them say, I remember Tom Doyle. I thought, yeah, you and half of Margaret River remember Tom Doyle. But this lady, and I said, oh, she said, he played the drums for my daughter's wedding. Okay, whatever. That was another one. But Dad used to play for the school socials and all that sort of thing. Him and May Wise actually used to. She'd play the piano and Dad had played the drums. And I can remember when they had the 50th anniversary of the school, and one of the chalice girls from Augusta got up and sort of told about sporting things and the socials and all that sort of thing. And she said, yeah, and they used to do the horizontal waltz. And I went up to her after and I tapped her on the shoulder and I said, you know how you said about the horizontal waltz? She said, yes. I said, I didn't. And she said, why? I said, my dad used to play the drums. I used to have to tell him I was going to the loo. I couldn't have done anything like that, I'm afraid. I'd have been in deep doo-doo. Although he knew everything that I was doing, because he used to be a boy out in Rosa Brook, and he was sort of a boyfriend when I was probably about year 8 or 9, something like that. And I was going to sit next to him at the pictures. And of course, in those days, the pictures were in the Rosebud Hall where the Woolworths is now. And I wouldn't sit next to him till the lights went off. I got up before they came on at half time. I wouldn't sit next to him till they went off at half time, and I got up before it finished. Anyhow, Sunday, Dad must have been working on the Sunday at the factory. And he come home at lunchtime. He said, I believe you sat with Mervyn Woods at the pictures last night. I couldn't get away with anything. He knew everything I did. It was not easy, but that's how it was.
You mentioned the Scouts earlier on when we were talking outside. What time in your life did you run the Scout movement?
Well, when I was living in Perth, when my son was 8, he decided he wanted to join Cubs. And I thought, yeah, that's fine. So they used to have their meetings on a Monday night, and they had Cubs on a Friday night. And he comes home on the Friday night and he says, Mum, there's a meeting on Monday. And I thought, I'm not going. Because the man that was the president of the P&C, and I was the treasurer, he was the scout leader. And I thought, if I go, I'll have a job. So, and they used to always have their AGM in March, the same as the P&C. So on the March, I said, no, I'll go next time. So he comes home in the April, Mum, there's a meeting on Monday. I said, okay. They'd cancelled the flipping March one because nobody turned up. And guess who ended up being the president? So after that, I started going every week and helping the cub leader. And then the scout leader's wife, she decided to do her warrant because he needed help because he was getting a few too many scouts. She said, you may as well do yours. She said, you're here every week. So, of course, I did my warrant, and I got my warrant December 1981. So I did Cubs there, and I did them at Highgate. And then when I came down, I actually took over the Cubs down here. And then probably for about, 91, probably till about 98 or something, and then I became group leader until 2016, and my sight got to the stage where I just couldn't do it anymore, so...
To do that, had you been a guide yourself?
Yeah, I did brownies down here, yes, yeah. Because when you do your warrant, you go one night into Scout headquarters and they tell you how it started and all that. But I mean, I knew all that because of being in the brownies and whatnot. And then you do a weekend of learning how to do your programs, and then a weekend of learning how to tie knots and all this sort of stuff. And then you do a weekend of camping. That's literally how you do your warrant.
Now, small boys can be pretty mischievous. Did you encounter any scamps?
Oh, I had a few of them. It was one of those things, as I say, most of the kids, funnily enough, I didn't really have a lot of trouble with, because when I first actually got my warrant, the lady that was the cub leader went to have an operation and never ever came back. And the chap that used to help, he was actually a scout leader, but he couldn't do scouts on a Wednesday because he was a trainer for a soccer team or something like that. So he used to come and help on a Friday night with the Cubs. He had a heart attack, didn't he? So I got left with the... Anyhow, the kids, they were playing up, of course, because I was a newie. And there was a boy the same age as my son. And he came and stood alongside me when we were doing our grand howl, or supposed to be. And did he tell those kids off? Boy, did he tell them off. I don't know how the kids felt. I could have got under a chair. I felt that small by the time he'd finished. I never, ever had any trouble with the kids after that. Never. And of course, once I got into it as such, they got to the stage they knew me. And I'm one of these. With kids, they can push me so far, but when they go over that, I'll sort of bring them back in. And I've got a bit of a look. I've got a couple of adopted kids that I never adopted them, they adopted me. But one of them, they were down here, and his wife was outside with me, and they've got 3 kids. And she went in to Frank and she said, how can she get the kids to do what she wants them to do? And Frank says, when she gets that look on her face, you sit down, shut up and don't move. So apparently I've got a look. And when actually New Year this year, funnily enough, we didn't do Christmas because my son's fiancée was doing fly in, fly out, and she wasn't home for Christmas. And my granddaughter and that, they'd been invited somewhere else. So we had it New Year's Day, and my son must have said something at the table, and I gave him a bit of a look. And my granddaughter's boyfriend saw it, and of course he'd heard about my look. And he's snuggling up to her and whatnot, and he said to her something about the look. And Brittany says, what do you mean? What that look that she... Was it for me? And Brittany said, no. And Brittany says, that wasn't the look. Oh, says Kyle, he was a bit scared.
Well, it's better than raising a cane, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I'm afraid my granddad was much the same, raised the voice. And Dad never, ever yelled, even if I did anything wrong. He never, ever raised his voice. He used to just say to me, did you learn anything from that? And that was it. It just made me think about... And I thought it was just him. And I said something to my son just recently. He said, that's what you used to say to us. So apparently I did the same. And my granddaughter said the same. To me, yelling at a kid, if you yell too much, they just block it out. They don't listen to you, you know. Whereas if you say something like that, you make them think about what they did and what they could have done to improve it as such, you know.
The quiet is more powerful than the noise.
Yeah, it is. It is, yeah.
You were very involved with the CWA too, weren't you?
Yeah, well, with the CWA, because we're actually 90 years old, our branch this year. It was started on the 1st of July, 1931. And funnily enough, my granddaughter is the 5th generation of our family in the CWA. That was another one that I came down from Perth and joined. And I got roped into that as on the committee as such. But I took on the president's job in 1992 when we were shifting out to where we are now. And mainly they wanted me to be secretary. I said no, because shifting, you're just as likely to have lost the books and everything, you know, whereas president, you didn't have anything, so I did that. And since then I've been president, vice president, secretary, treasury, you name it, I've been that. But it's just an amazing organisation, and it's one of those things. They have a state conference every year, and I always say to everybody, you need to go to at least one state conference, because you don't realise what the CWA do, you know, for the community as such. Because I can remember when I first came down here, and of course I started going to the conference, and I had a chiropractor in Perth that I used to go to, and so while I was up there I went to see him, and he said, I thought you lived in Margaret River now. I said, I do. I said, but I'm up for CWA conference. Oh, fantastic, mob. No, okay. And apparently, like with your Medicare and all those friendly societies and all those sort of things, you never could get chiropractic and that sort of stuff. But the CWA apparently put in a motion, and it was passed at the conference and sent to, and they actually did it so that you could get money back on it. And that was the CWA. So, and there's a lot of things like that, you know, like helmets for bikes, that's CWA. And you know how you get on the side of the road with the bumps, so that's CWA too. There's a lot of things like that, but you don't realise about what they do unless you go to conference and hear all that sort of stuff, you know.
It has an image, doesn't it? A false image of sort of making scones and parties, but you see it as much more involved in the community. Yeah. Can you think of other things that it contributed to?
Well, I mean, it's even to the extent of they do scholarships and things for kids from the country to go to school in the city, and they, you know, in floods and all that sort of stuff, and they do that. And I mean, even here, like for bushfires or anything like that, the CWA are literally on call for morning teas and lunches, and, you know, we do all that sort of stuff. And, you know, there's a lot of community things that we do, and if we're asked, we do it. It's just because when they first started CWA, as I always thought, funnily enough, that CWA in WA would have been a lot later than like the eastern states. But I actually watched the program, and it was first started in New South Wales, I think, and it's only 1922, whereas it started in 1924 here. So it wasn't that far after, the time. And they do a lot of, because they've actually got a part of it where it's sort of worldwide, and they look after, a lot of the countries that are having problems with, the women as such, and that sort of thing. So
I met a woman once who was with the WI in England, and she'd come to Australia to share her time with a CWA friend.
Yeah, well, that there is literally the same as us as such, yeah.
The Women's Institute.
Yeah.
You're also involved with agriculture, aren't you, here?
Yeah.
Can you describe that?
Well, the thing is, my granddad was the first president of the Ag Society in Margaret River in 1929, and that's a bit the same with my granddaughter. She's the fifth generation in that too. But we've always sort of been involved because Dad was secretary for years too and in those days, now they have literally a secretary and a treasurer, but in those days Dad was secretary and treasurer, he was both. And then we used to put things in because I've got trophies and whatnot at home and certificates and things that they used to win a lot with the grasses and that, because when they first came down to Margaret River was 1922, so it'll be 100 years next year. And they were actually on Route 12 in Quarrama. But in 1923 they shifted out to what's now Keevil Road. And as you go down, on the right-hand side was my granddad's farm. On the left-hand side was my dad and his brother's farm. And Granddad he had the first irrigation system in Margaret River. He used to grow grasses for the farmers like cooch and kikuyu. And he used to also have like a garden, and Dad's youngest brother, he used to go into town in a little covered cart and sell the veggies in town from the veggie garden that Granddad had grown. And then, of course, they had cows as well. They had the dairy side of it too. But he used to get his grass from Colonel Le Swift. The Colonel Le Swift, or Dr. Le Swift, that Dad was in the army with, his father, they immigrated to Melbourne and then they came over here. And old Colonel Le Swift, he was the first curator of the Perth Zoo in 1898. And he had a farm, a property on Caves Road, not far from where you go up Warcliffe Road where the cemetery is. He got friendly with my granddad, and of course because of the animals, the African animals, because they had kikuyu and cooch, and he gave it to my granddad to grow for the farmers because it was harder for the cows and that to pull up and all that sort of thing. So, and it's the Swift Street in Margaret River is actually named after him.
So that was an interesting innovation. The annual Margaret River show, of course, was important.
Yeah, I used to, when I was a kid, I used to put things in, of course, exhibition and all that sort of stuff. And it was quite funny, actually, because pretty much where the Shire offices now are, sort of not far from there, was where the exhibition hall was, and the secretary's office was at the front. And if I ran out of money on the rides, I used to go, and there used to be a man called Alan Summers, I think his name was, and he was the first postman they ever had in Margaret River, and he used to help Dad on show day. And if I ran out of money, I'd go and ask Alan for some money, and then he'd have to ask Dad for the money back. Whereas if I'd have gone and asked Dad, I probably wouldn't have got it. But and then I used to help Mum because they, on one side of the thing, they had I suppose it would have been like the sort of thing where the footballers used to change and all that sort of stuff, and had a bit of a dining room type thing. And we used to do lunches and all that sort of stuff there, and lunches for the officials and all that. And Mum used to help, so I used to help there. And then, of course, when I came back, my husband used to always put things in. He used to always win the gladioli section. He used to have a gladioli called Priscilla, and it was a whitey coloured one with a pinky sort of edge on the thing, and it used to huge flowers it had on it. And he used to win every year, never used to win the gladioli thing. And he used to make miniature carts too. They were all scale, so sort of 2 inches in the normal cart was 2 mils in the, sort of. He used to make those, and he used to put those in the thing. And I used to do, baking. But we, the Anglican Church, we always used to do lunches there, so of course I used to do that as well.
Was it an important part of the community, the show?
Oh yes, yeah, very much so. It was because in those days you used to, like Bustleton, and I don't know how it works now with Bustleton, but they used to always be in November when I was a kid, and so we had the first week in November, Bustleton had the second, and then the next year it'd swap around. But they used to go around to all the different places and decide what dates the shows were on and all that sort of thing, because Dad was on that. And that's a Southwest Agricultural something or other it's called. I can't remember exactly the name of it. And that's where they sort of confer, and a bit with the big show as well in Perth, that sort of. Because Dad actually, in latter years, he used to actually go to the Royal Show because he was a member of the Royal Ag Society as well. And he used to run the blacksmith shop at the show. And Norm Aisbett, the cartoonist, every year he used to do a drawing of Dad, so I had about 3 of those. And I've given one to the Historical Society. My son wants to keep one, and I'm going to keep the other one.
Well, I wanted to ask you about the Historical Society because you became very involved with that. What was your role there?
Well, to start with, because we started in 1999, I think it was, and it sort of carried on. They had a sort of a group that did the Light of the Lyn, the book, and that more or less became the Historical Society in 1999. I think I was the first secretary, actually, if I remember rightly. Put it this way, if I wasn't, I was pretty close to it, and I've held a few positions there, like president and vice president and all that sort of stuff. At the moment, they're getting all my historical stuff because we're hoping to sell up where we are, and I'm going to move into town, so I've got to get rid of a lot of stuff, and there's a heck of a lot of historical stuff I've got in the house, because it goes way back. And I mean, even to the extent of my dad used to always play the bugle, the last post and all that sort of thing, at the Anzac services. And I've got the bugle, of course, and that was actually Colonel Swift's bugle, because he was the bugler for the 2nd 7th Field Ambulance. And the colonels used to carry the little baton there, and Dad's actually got Colonel Swift's one of that too. So, that sort of stuff can go to the Historical Society because it's a twofold thing. It's not only the fact that Dad used to play it all the time, but it belonged to Colonel Swift as well.
What do you think the Historical Society has done for the Margaret River community?
Put it this way, I think it's progressed a lot in the last 10 years or so, because I actually had a run-in with my son's old boss. He used to work for Watershed, and they were going to build a wine centre down there where that is, and it was going to be apparently built and then the school and the house put on top of it, which was ridiculous. And yeah, of course it was voted out, so it didn't happen. And he bailed me up one day at IGA. And he said, "You didn't go for..." I said, "No." I said, 2 or 3 things. I said, 1, I said, the idea of it with the thing on top is ridiculous. I said, number 2, a wine centre there is silly because there's not enough room for parking for buses and stuff like that. He said, "But the wine industry is the history of Margaret River." I said, "Excuse me?" I said, "What do you think that is down there?" I said, "It's the group settlements. It's what started the area." And I said, "You realise that the wine industry here wouldn't be known apart from one thing?" And he said, "What's that?" And I said, "The Lewin concert." And he looked at me and I said, "Yeah." I said, "Because my dad, he died on the 21st of February 84 and he was buried on the 23rd, which was a Thursday, I think. And of course, being a leap year, February next year, the 23rd was a Saturday. And that was the first Lewin concert, 23rd of February 85. And it was a London Philharmonic Orchestra. And that is literally what put Margaret River on the map, the Lewin concert. So he just sort of looked at me and went, and walked off. I don't think he was too happy with me.
There's an interesting intersection, isn't there, between the old dairying and the wine industry, because I remember being told that the wine industry actually provided employment for some of the farmers' wives, that they actually worked on the grapes, so they got a bit of extra income.
Yeah, well, the thing is, the wine industry, I mean, that never started here till 1967 because Vass Felix was the first one. And funnily enough, when Leith actually worked for Watershed and Vass Felix bought them out, they had an induction day sort of thing for those that were working for Watershed and that. And they went out to the main Vass Felix place and they sort of ask everybody, how long they'd been here and all that sort of thing. And of course my son said, I've only been here 28 years. But I mean, he'd been coming here since 1971. But living here it was only about the 28 years. He said, but my family's been here for nearly 100 years. The woman that asked the question, George just about hit the floor apparently when he said that. And I said, well, you just tell her that your granddad was a friend of Dr. Tom Cullity that started Vas Felix. No, he said, I didn't think I'd better tell her that. It'd shock her too much because he was a friend of Dad's. And the thing is, a lot of times when the wineries first started, they were doctors, and I don't say they didn't like their wine, but it was, to a certain extent, it was a bit of a tax dodge for them, and that's how they started. And I mean, the only ones I can think of that really weren't doctors, the earlier ones, were Greylands, they weren't, and Willesby weren't either. They were both farms, dairy farms, because I knew both those families. Because I've actually got a bottle that used to have port in it, and it was one of the first ports ever put out by the Greylands thing, and that would have been in the 60s, the sort of late 60s and that. But that's literally how it sort of started, the wine industry. It was more through that than anything else, and it sort of developed from there. And I mean, even, Xanadu was started by a doctor too, because I know with the Honans, as in the fire brigade, they always go out there in case of, and they have a bit of a conflab every now and again, and they went, must have been before the 2018 one. I think it was Dennis, his wife, sort of said, maybe we should have a celebration because it's 40 years this year, because it started in 1978, Lewin. Lee says, yeah, he says, I was here at the opening of your cellar doors. And of course Dennis Horgan said, how do you get here? And he said, I was with my granddad. Who was your granddad? And Lee says, Tom Doyle. Tom Doyle. Yeah, and they'd actually gone out for the opening of the cellar doors, and must have been sort of around Christmas time, so we were down and we went out with them, and that, because Leith always remembers him and Jeanette, because they would have, 78, Leith would have been 7, so Jeanette would have been 9, and the winemaker at the time, he had 3 kids and they're about the same age, and Leith said he can remember running around on the lawn and all that sort of stuff, while it was going on and that. But he got a bit of a shock when he found out Leith had been at the opening.
You've rightly pointed out that the group settlement was really the foundation of the settler part of Margaret River history. Has that spirit survived? Because one of the things about group settlement was they were all doing it hard and there was a lot of sharing. Is that still part of the community, do you think?
I'd say possibly not as much as it was, because there's so many people, like even the old settlement, there's so many people around the place that don't realise it's there, they just don't. Because the amount of people I've sort of said, about the old settlement, where's that? They don't sort of realise it's there. And we try to get it out as much as we can, but, there's only so much. I must admit now, what's probably helped to a certain extent, they're getting a lot of school visits, and that's probably helping a lot because the kids are learning, and then the parents are literally getting the information when the kids go home, and they actually have a ball, the kids do, because they do scones, and they learn how they used to do the washing and pegging. They have socks and all this sort of stuff, and they peg them and use the old pegs, not the clip pegs, but the old pegs, and then they go into the school and they have a bit of a sort of a little bit of a lesson and all this sort of stuff, and more or less how it was when we went to school and all that sort of thing. So I think that's probably helping more than anything else, because the kids are going home and telling, because to a certain extent, if they have 30 kids, they have so many parents come, but not all the parents come. It's only perhaps, say, 4 or 5 kids' parents that actually come. So the other ones that they go home and tell mum and dad what happened and what, and all this sort of thing. And they do scones and all that sort of stuff too. So,
There's one building in Margaret River, the old hospital, which is now, of course, the community centre. That is built in the 1920s, isn't it, to help the group settlements. What's the importance, do you think, of that hospital in the history of Margaret River?
To me, that was when it was built. I think it was started to be built about 1923, and I think it was officially opened about 25, somewhere in about that. And to me, that was one of probably the biggest necessities that came here, especially in that time, because that was when more people were moving into the area and they needed it, because old Ted Ashton, that used to live here, was the first baby born in that hospital. He used to tell me about it all the time. When I used to pick him up from the new hospital now, he was in there before he went into Mirabina, and when I used to go pick him up for church, and he used to tell me every now and again, I was born in that island. And I said, yes, I know, Ted. He told me that many times I could remember it. But to me, that was, I don't know, it was sort of part of the community somehow or other. It was a necessity because I can remember sort of Dad talking and that sort of thing. The main street didn't really exist, what we know as the main street now. It was literally down where the Shell garage is. The house on the corner, that was Miss Higgins' boarding house, because in those days, if you had a single teacher came to teach here, that's where they lived, at Miss Higgins' boarding house. And then Jar Rock, that was a doctor's surgery at one time, and then it became a furniture place, and, it sort of did quite a few things. But you didn't go up the main street. Tunbridge Street that is now, that was the main street, because that had the hospital in it, had the co-op, and of course I don't know what they call it now, but it used to be the Freycinet on the corner there. That was where the post office and West Store was and all that sort of stuff. And of course the police station was there and the ambulance, so that was the main street literally, until probably around about the time the hotel was built in 36. And that's probably when the main street started to, take off as such.
And of course that hospital would have been a godsend for women living, say, far out who were about to have babies or had an injury, or people have talked about how the hospital was almost developed because of that, because people had a long way to get medical help.
Yeah, well, they would have come from everywhere around the place to there, because, you didn't have a hospital in Augusta until probably between 1960 and 65 somewhere, because it was here when we first got married in 65, because when we came down in 65, there was only one doctor in Margaret River, and that was John Wilson. And then he retired somewhere between 65 and 67, because we used to have to go down to Augusta to see John Williams. And he was the one that sort of started the hospital and everything down there, because his father, funnily enough, delivered my husband in Manjimup. He was a doctor too, John's father.
Did you have a family involvement yourself with the Margaret River Hospital?
No, my main one, grandmother, of course, she passed away there, and then my dad did, but that's about the only thing we really had. Because when I was a kid, in 1950 it was, Dr. Tunbridge left, and we got a Dr. Paddy Barrett. He was a funny guy. He had a Jaguar, and he only had 2 speeds, flat out and faster. And at the time, the bridge that comes over the river is fairly straight now, but it was more like that. His Jag ended up in the river a couple of times because he was going too fast. He actually was the doctor that my granddad had, because my granddad died in September 50. And then in March 1950, I actually had to have my tonsils out. And in those days, it was chloroform, of course. And I can remember him asking me, how's your granddad? And I don't remember answering him because I was out cold. And I had my tonsils out, got sent home. And Mum says, what do you want for lunch, dear? I said, I want scrambled eggs on toast. And Mum said, but you won't be able to eat the toast, dear. Yes, I will. And I can still feel that toast going down my throat. Not the eggs, but the toast I can still. And then in 1951, I got nephritis, which is inflammation and hemorrhage of the kidneys. And there was me, one of the Rogers boys, and a girl from Witchcliffe. The girl from Witchcliffe died from it. And Neil, you weren't supposed to walk around or anything like that. Even to go to the toilet, you had to be carried and all this sort of stuff. And he just ran around and he had a lot of problems, and he actually passed away from more or less symptoms from it when he was about 40. But me, I never did that. Dad carried me everywhere, and even, it was in the winter, of course, and even there to sit in front of the fire at the lounge, I got carried in there and carried back and all that sort of stuff. And he had Dr. Barrett he sent me up to PMH for a week, and I had needles. And I had that many needles, I used to count the holes in my legs, from the needles. I came home and he used to come and visit about every 2 days. And Dad set up a thing, and he used to test my urine every day, see how much blood was still in it. And anyhow, he came one day and they'd set it up because our house was sort of like a group house, and they put my bed so that I could see into the kitchen. Anyhow, he come to see me and he walked out in the kitchen, and Mum says he was just about wetting himself laughing. And I mean, I don't remember doing this, but he said to Mum said to him, he said, "What?" She said, "What's the matter?" He said, "I've been dismissed." She said, "You've what?" He said, "I've been dismissed." She said, "What do you mean?" "I've been told I needn't come anymore. Dr. Doyle lives here." But he was back about 2 days later, of course. But I don't remember telling him that one. I really don't. But he was a phenomenal. He was one of these sort of doctors. You could ring him up, give him your symptoms, and he could tell you over the phone just about what was wrong with you. He was amazing. He was fantastic. He was very much into the starting of the golf course too. Paddy Barrett was. He passed away probably 4 or 5 years ago, I think, because he actually went back to Melbourne, because that's where he came from Melbourne. Went back to Melbourne. But if they had any important things or anything like that, the golf club, he'd always come over for the thing. He used to come over on a reasonably regular basis.
Your memories of Margaret River go back a long way. How do you feel about it now? Has it changed from the community you grew up in much?
Yeah, I think so. It's just that I think, like, when I was a kid, you knew everybody, you know. And I mean, I'll admit, like, when we first came back down here in 1990, half the people, I knew all the older people, that was fine, because they were people that I'd grown up with and all that sort of thing. But the younger ones, no. And then about 1993, or 1992 actually, my daughter came down from Perth to live, because Leith actually came down when we did, but she didn't come down until 1992. She couldn't get a job, and of course, well, it just shows you the area, like, to get into the Shire was a bit like how it used to be on the wharf sort of business. You had to know somebody to get a job, and that's literally how it was. And most of the businesses, like the transport businesses or anything like that, the male side of the family ran the business and the women did the office, you know, so you couldn't get jobs there. So we started doing night road couriers, Jeanette and I, and it was amazing how many people we met by doing that. And we did that until she went to Perth in 1996. And then Leith took it over, my son, and so him and I did it until 2003. But I probably wouldn't have known half the people in the town if I hadn't done that. I know more because of it than I would have before. I suppose being in a fair few organisations, I know a lot too. Plus I used to do Meals on Wheels, you know, that was another thing I did. And I did that right from when I first came down here, because I know I did that. I used to always do it on a Thursday because at the time, even though I had a licence, we only had one vehicle. And my husband used to do a place out in Caves Road where he was literally there from sort of early in the morning till mid-afternoon, so I could have the ute and I could do what I liked. And I'd do all the shopping and that, and I'd do meals. I mean, a lot of the ones I went to were the older ones that I knew anyway, but there was a lot that I didn't, so I met a lot that way as well, you know. And that, because when my husband got sick, they brought him back from Perth, and I think I was supposed to do, well, funnily enough, he passed away on the Wednesday, and I was supposed to do Meals on Wheels on the Thursday, and I thought you weren't sure what was going to happen, so I went and said I can't do it. And there was a lady there, and it's quite funny, I know her, but I can't to this day tell you who it was. But she said, "Oh, I'll do it for you." Of course, it got to about April, and I thought, "Oh, God, I haven't, you know, let them know that I can do it again." And I rung up, "Don't do it anymore, I only do it once a week." And so I actually rung Silver Chain, because they were giving them Meals on Wheels, or I think Silver Chain had taken over, that's right. They were giving them frozen meals, these old people, you know. And I rung them up and I said, "How stupid can you get?" I said, "Old people, you know, half of them couldn't use a microwave and all that sort of stuff anyway." And they said, I said, "They'd agree to anything you said." I said, "But half of them, the only time they see anybody is when we go and take their meals to them." I told them off. So, of course, then I think Home Care actually took it on, so they do it now, I think. But that was interesting going to, because my daughter used to quite often drive me. She was on fluid tablets, so consequently she didn't particularly like sitting for too long. Of course, I used to go in and I'd be yakking, of course, wouldn't I? So I'd get into trouble because I'd taken too long, but it's just, I just enjoyed that. So I sort of got to know a lot of people, and sort of that way too. With the older ones, I learned about their kids as well, so I sort of knew both sides of the family as such, I learned. I learned a lot doing that. It was interesting.
So does the original spirit of Margaret River as a small town with a group settlement history still survive, do you think?
To a certain extent it does, yes, but I think it's a bit hard to describe. It's the ones that are, it's quite funny, I always had the opinion that there was a lot of people came to live here just because it was Margaret River. And I thought that was just me. And as I said to Jen when we were coming, there's a girl that works at the Silver Chain. She lives sort of right out. We're talking one day, or she was talking to somebody, and I was listening, and I thought to myself, it's not just me. And that's what she said. She said there's a lot of people come down here because they like the area, but there's a lot of people come just because it's Margaret River. And I thought, oh, it's not just me. And I think that's where the thing is. The ones that really want to be here because they want to be in Margaret River, not just because of the name, they're sort of fitting in, whereas the others are sort of to the side. They don't sort of mix, I suppose, or something like that. It's just, I don't know.
They see Margaret River as a kind of status thing rather than an interesting place to live.
And they're the ones that don't seem to mix as well as the ones that come here because they really want to. Because I know with our place, because we've got 8.5 acres, or 3.37 hectares it is, so we can divide it into 3. And the chap that's done it for us, it's actually Viv Halsel's son, and as he said, there's a lot of people, since the COVID thing hit, that they're doing more or less like the fly-in, fly-out type thing, where they want to live down here, but they don't want to live in a place like Brookfield or anything like that. They want a bigger place, and they'll just probably once a month or something go up for 2 or 3 days up to Perth, to check in sort of thing. So they reckon they probably won't have that much trouble selling our block. And the back block, because our block's sort of high, goes down a bit and comes up like that. And so the back one, I never realised, but I went up there a while ago, and you can actually see all over where we live from the back block. It's quite high. I never realised how high it was. So that one probably sell quite easily, the back one. Because that's another funny thing about there, because the property we're on, Keevil's actually owned it. And everybody thinks they've been here since Adam was a boy, but they haven't. They didn't come till 1955. And I think it's the 4th owners of that property, because my dad and his brother had it first. Then George Turner, he was a chap that had a business near where the hardware is now. And it was a cream carter and school buses. He bought it. And then a chap called Noel Bickford bought it off him, and he was our first dentist here. And then somebody else bought it, I can't remember who it was, and then Keevil's bought it off them. And, of course, old George, he was on the council, so he got it named Keevil Road. And he was in the Freemasons, and so was Dad's youngest brother. And I'll guarantee every month when they went to their meetings, he would have said to old George, I don't know how it's Keevil Road because you didn't make the bloody road, we did. I guarantee it. I'd bet on it. Because the thing is that when you go down Keevil Road where the waterfalls are at the bottom, that was on the bottom of my dad's property. I'll guarantee that's what he said to old George every month. George probably knew it by heart. If he had any sense, he just said, oh, yes, I know. But I don't think he would have. He would have... Because see, that's another old building that's gone, the Freemasons. That's gone now. Yeah, because there are not many old buildings left anymore. There's the factory, I think that was built like 23, 24, somewhere in about there. That was fairly early on. And because our church will be 100 years old in 6 years' time, the Anglican Church. Apart from the old police house, that's still there, of course, because the first policeman they had in Margaret River is Tim Winton's grandfather. Because Coralie Stretfield, of course, she was a Winton, and she was a phenomenal pianist. Coralie, she was amazing. So I used to do Meals on Wheels to her in the latter years, and quite often I'd go there and she'd be actually playing the piano. Oh, God, she could play the piano. She was phenomenal on the piano, Coralie. Yeah, she was... But I'd say when he got transferred from Margaret River, he must have gone to Albany, I think. Yeah, and that's where his son got married, and that's where Tim was born. I like his books too. Not that I can read them anymore.
Lynn, thank you very much for sharing your memories of Margaret River. It's been wonderful to listen to. Thank you.
I could go on forever.